Welcome back to the WatchTower Film Podcast, the film review podcast on the Towercast Network by Cinephiles for Cinephiles. You are joining us today. You're at the tail end of our International Cinema Month.
Wow.
And it's been a ride. We've screened some films. We've talked about some things.
And what a way to end it.
Yeah, and we got a special guest. Before I introduce him, though, who curated this film, I have to introduce everybody in the room. My fellow co-host, Mr. Jean-Eric Castro, offering an acting perspective.
And some colorful commentary for this film.
And while we're on the always colorful commentary from Mr. Castro, and while we're on the acting front, Mr. Danny Nunez, making sure we're looking good on the switches back there.
Dang.
And Mr. Michael Allow offering a cinematography perspective.
I know. I'm kind of sad that we're going to close off our worldly month. I feel like I've been exposed to so much more than I'm normally exposed to. So.
It's been such a great month. And it's like anything, you just want more, right? You want to explore so much more cinema, but that's why we do this.
If anything, our guest for today just gave me an extra itch.
Yeah, for real.
That now I got to go see a doctor for. It's crazy.
That's how I feel every time I talk to this man. But Mr. Eric C.K. Nunez, make sure we're sounding good back there. Shout out to who's our fellow producer as well, Mr. Austin Young, who couldn't make it out today, or will make it out later. We'll see. But we miss you, buddy.
We love you.
Love you, buddy.
And it's funny, man, because we've had this thing to say about CK for however long, 3 weeks since he's been in LA for that gig, and then he comes back, and then Austin's like,
I miss you guys so much. It's crazy. I was only expecting 1 week, and then I just got another gig after another gig, and I'm going back again in a week.
That's such a good problem to have, though.
Exactly. That's what
LA's been doing a ton, man. Like, I don't know if you were out there during the whole shoot in LA rally and stuff like that, like film in LA stuff.
Yeah.
So,
and then on top of that, there was the Bernie rally that went down.
That's right.
There's been a lot of things. An earthquake happened the day before I came back.
Really?
It's insane.
Crazy, man. Well, we're happy to have you back, CK.
Yes.
And
Yes, sir.
like I said, you'll leave again. You leave again, and you're going to experience that car accident like the film. What a way to switch over to the film we're about to introduce. To introduce, before we introduce the film, I want to introduce the man who curated this film. This is a very special guest who we deem
absolutely
he's one of the best cinephiles ever that we know. And aside from that, he's a fellow producer, film critic, member of the Critics' Choice Association, and he's just got a lot to talk about. Anytime I talk to Chuck, I feel like I only have a small amount of cinema knowledge compared to the plethora. I feel like I'm scratching the surface. So it's great. So without further ado, Mr. Charles Horack joining us on the podcast today.
Dang.
The one and only.
Great Chuck.
Stop it. Where's the popcorn?
That's a good point. We got to have
That's true. For a year, and I keep hearing about the popcorn.
popcorn. That's right. We got to have popcorn.
That's true. How you doing, sir?
Thank you, guys. It's good to see you. It's good to see the new set with the new props.
Yeah.
I know.
Well,
Graciously donated.
Always evolving.
We love it. Always trying to build little pieces. So thank you to you for the bookcases, and then Cheeky Monkey, kind of was like, we got some extra lights. Let's just toss some stuff in together.
I think you could make a movie with all this.
I think so.
You really could.
So. No, but we were thinking as we were planning this year, because we always try to plan, several months ahead, maybe even a year in advance if we can, and. We were thinking, I kind of asked guys, I want to curate a whole month of foreign cinema. Let me pick all the films. We usually pick one each week. Everybody kind of takes turns, depending on the theme. This time, I'm let me pick all of them, and we started talking about how do we want to close out the month. I was like, you know what? We've been trying to have Chuck on the podcast for however long. Let's let him pick a film, and we just kind of hit it hard. We did the similar thing with Animation Month with Zach Pastro, who was with us, and curated a film for us, and that was great. And it always just gets us out of our box to really explore some stuff. And I was over here I'm gonna pick certain films that naturally just kind of blow your mind, but at the same time, how do I ease them in a little more into foreign cinema? And it was
and just
Seven Samurai, and
well, to peel back the curtain, also, Chuck, I love you, appreciate you, but you gave us a list of foreign films we've never seen, and then we just kind of looked at the list, and it was now pick one, and we're like. Do you guys want to see the posters?
yeah, because we try not to see trailers. We try to see everything.
We narrowed it down to 3, and then we saw the trailer.
Well, I saw the list of the other films. We were watching some really heavy hitters and important films from world cinema, and I thought maybe end on something a little more out there.
Out there's a way to put it.
Orbit,
that was the right call.
Not so classical. I know you just watched, was it Breathless?
Breathless.
Yes.
So you did some French new wave. This film tonight is sometimes considered Japanese new wave, but he was not truly in the Japanese new wave. He floats. Seijun Suzuki, who's the director we're going to be talking about today, kind of floats between the classical period, which is the Kurosawas, which you started with, Mizoguchi, Ozu, and the avant-garde that would come out into the Japanese new wave period, which is Imamura and Oshima, who he knew. But this is a B-movie director from an action house called Nikatsu, which was Japanese oldest studio. And the things he was doing by the late 60s, working within the studio system, is really extraordinary.
Yeah. We'll be talking about 1967's Branded to Kill. I when I started looking this up, I couldn't help but feel like another film that almost made it to the list this month. I couldn't help but think about like Yugetsu. And just kind of that highly stylistic. I mean, that was obviously a period piece, and it talks about the war and just other things. This was definitely in this cult B movie feel, but super stylized, and obviously took a lot from like American noir and dark comedies and stuff like that. It had a lot going for it, and for a genre film or for a B film, it's so crazy. It's so crazy how they were able to really just still make a good film. And to note a little bit about that studio, they were notorious for having the same formula for making films. So what they would do is give a director 1 week of pre-production, 25 days to shoot, and 3 days of post-production.
Just 3 days.
3 days of post-production. And this film was edited in 1 day.
Makes a little sense.
They shot to edit. They shot for edit. So that
was released 3 days later. So
whoa!
Turn around at Nikatsu, it was a machine.
Yeah.
And Seijun Suzuki was working with in that machine, and he was not the only one. There were a lot of B-movie directors there. They were also making A pictures. So he was toiling in that budget area where they would put it with a heavier drama or something with an A picture. And as he started at Nikatsu in 1958. And Nikatsu had sort of was reborn in about 54. They'd been around since almost the turn of the century. But during the war, most of the Japanese studios were shut down for various reasons. And they came back as a distributor after the war and actually made a lot of money distributing American films to the Japanese. Very popular. The Japanese were really into American culture by the 50s particularly. They were making so much money they thought, let's get back into production. But they needed to differentiate themselves at Nikatsu, and they lured away from all the other studios a lot of young filmmakers. And they were really tied into the youth revolt era, the late 50s. They were listening to American jazz. There was big American cars on the streets. The real fascination, the youth of the late 50s, early 60s were, like everywhere around the world, were beginning to pull away from traditional society and push back a little bit. And so Nikatsu had this edge, and they were doing a lot of, teen revolt movies and Yakuza films, which most of the films that Seijun Suzuki, this was the film we're going to talk about today, Branded to Kill, was his 40th film. I think in 1963 he directed 7 films. Yeah. So the output was just tremendous. Yeah. But as he worked into the 60s, I think the formulas that were coming down, it was a studio. They were all under contract. Here's your script. You start in a week, that kind of thing. He was really beginning to push back against these formulas and kind of, I like to think of him as being bored and inventing ways to keep himself engaged. Yeah. And as the 60s went on, his films got wilder and wilder and less, to the studio bosses, they were incoherent.
But I mean, in that mold or that system, you can either make a bad film because you don't have the time or resources to make something good, or like here, it's utilizing, I guess, that pressure to just really go for it. I mean, we'll talk more about it later on, but when we were talking about Breathless, there was this element of like cutting the fat and just jumping straight into what you need to see. And that's what I felt like made it feel avant-garde, but the fact that we're just honing in on all the things we need to see. Like it's not a.
But it's a 90-minute, another 90-minute film.
Yeah,
like
it's
this is a
super
90
tight,
minute,
but it punches very hard. Yeah.
I will say though, also like they were obviously heavily inspired by American cinema in a lot of senses, but even the making of. I mean, we talk a lot about just how where Casablanca was born out of this like machine that the studios were just making 100 pictures a year, and I mean, true to form, they're also like. They're almost like a Japanese B movie Warner Brothers that they focused on gangster pictures a lot, you know.
I think of them kind of like RKO, early Columbia, some maybe Republic. You know, they in America in the 40s. You know, this would be the kind of machinery that's churning out B westerns. You know, there's one a week practically.
Sure.
You know, with all the same formulas. Bad guys were black. You know, good guys were white. That kind of stuff. And by the time you get to the late 50s, Nikatsu is putting out these films, and around 58 is when Seijun Suzuki shows up. And immediately he's nothing with the flourishes that you saw in Branded to Kill, but he's already beginning to push some things. I went back, I think it was soon after I discovered this director in the early 2000s, Kino began releasing some of his earlier work. And there's a great film I recommend people see at the beginning of his career called Take Aim at the Police Van. I mean, the title alone, you got to see that movie, right?
Yeah. How can you skip that?
And we'll get into like the nitty gritty of kind of how this picture revolutionized cinema in a lot of the sense, because though it was intended for like this almost home release thing, like let's just get it out. It broke the mold, and it broke the mold so much that it threatened the director's career in a lot of ways. So before we get into all of that, we traditionally open kind of the discussion with a rating between 1 and 10. The scale seems to slide, but the initial thought that we should all be having is, how does this contribute to cinema? That's kind of the question to ask. So like we always go from 1 to 10. In our tradition, whoever chose the film gets to pick who goes first. Or you can go first. All right, Castro, you're going first. There you go.
Wow, I'm still living with it, man. I just finished it like 10 minutes ago.
Yeah.
It was pretty cool to watch you guys watch it for the first time.
Our reactions, just seeing
Hey,
it.
well, just know that in
made
that
my
10
night.
minutes, they made a film. Like,
Right.
Let me see. I will probably give it, just for right now, I'll give it an 8.4 because I like how, you know, it was.
It's your style of like films in terms
You know
of
what?
like.
It kind of reminded me like if David Lynch
a spy
directed
movie?
John Wick, but he was drinking a lot of sake and went through like
rice.
French New Wave for a
I
while.
told you, like, even I felt like it would be like David Lynch and David Fincher got together and said, hey,
or
let's
even
make
better,
something.
yeah.
But because it reminded me of David Fincher's newest, The Killer, you know, the Netflix thing. And
Interesting.
it's, you know, he flops an assassination that he's hired to do. And it kind of kicks off in this weird comedy, too. So it reminded me a lot of that Fincher picture.
Yeah, and I guess it's true. Like, it's my type of film because it has a lot of like symbolism and metaphors, right? Like, I'm still trying to like think about what I was
Digest it.
seeing it, right? But
yeah.
I
Your
like
eyes
how,
lit up when, like, the butterfly thing happened. Like, your eyes lit up. And
I like the whole rice, the whole sense of the rice. That's desire, right?
Sure,
That's
sure,
the whole.
yeah,
That's how I took it. Desire, and then the female was.
There's like a female gaze thing. There's a femme fatale thing. There's so much, man. There's so
She was
much.
death, no? She was a representation of
Well,
like.
she was obsessed with death. I think it's like that thing of like the
is
dullness of
great.
yeah.
I love hearing people that have just seen the film
Yeah.
a few minutes ago.
Yeah, I'm
That's,
trying to
I
dissect
think
it
it's
right
like
now.
the
It's-
dullness of their lifestyle, right? Like being so over it, and she's kind of just like she's around these dudes all the time. It doesn't impress her anymore. It doesn't surprise her anymore.
Okay, well, I'm still.
But
I'm still-
8.4,
Yeah,
8.4.
well, but I'm still because I'm still like thinking about it. So the whole ranking, is it all about masculinity?
Sure, absolutely.
I'm still thinking about it, but yeah, I'll
That's-
give it an 8.4. I'm just trying to dissect
Yeah.
it right now. But
Cool.
yeah, 8.4.
Mr. DeLong.
8.3.
8.3.
Oh, wow.
All right, fair. Guys, you guys want to give a rating before
I'll give it a solid 8.5.
8.5?
Yeah, I liked it. What do we?
Dude, I came in like the second half of the film.
Yeah.
From what I saw, I could give it like an 8.12.
Wow.
Man, you guys are hovering over 8s. I'll go a little higher. I think I'm sitting somewhere like at a 9. Like I'm happy at a 9 because I'm never this impressed by genre pictures. Like we covered like Thunder Road not too long ago with Javier as our guest.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And we've covered a few. We covered the Grindhouse stuff
Oh,
not
it
too
was,
long ago.
Rolling Thunder, right?
Rolling Thunder. Sorry, Rolling Thunder, not
right.
Thunder Road. Rolling Thunder.
Yeah, that's the short.
Yeah, we covered. You're right. We covered that. We covered Tarantino's his Grindhouse contribution. What is it?
Oh, Death Proof.
Death Proof. You know, so like we've covered some of these modern and kind of older, and they never scratched that itch for me cinematically that much. And this did a lot for me because it wasn't just this cookie cutter thing. It was intended to be that way, but with a director like this, who's just like, I'm kind of sick of that. Let's just like really dig in and try to do something and be inspired not just by American cinema, but I think there was a conversation going. The through line we seem to be seeing, this was not intentional for the podcast, but we opened after Kurosawa. We opened with Polish New Wave, and then we went to French New Wave, and now we're in Japanese New Wave. And the through line seems to be like, I'm bored. Like, I'm sick of what I'm seeing on the screen. And, you know, two of the three that I mentioned, there were film critics that were just like, this again? Like, this again? And this scenario. I just love that. I think the through line is like, we're going to take even genre pictures where there's no pressure and they don't expect to make a ton of money or anything like that. Or they expect them to be quick cash grabs. And in this case, the director was still just like, I'm gonna tell a story and really hone in on the stylistic things I can do and that type of thing. So I'm happy.
Are you guys inspired now to run out and make a
Absolutely.
feature film in a month?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
I'll give you
25
a week.
days. 25 days.
I'll give you 5 days.
4 days to
We
edit.
shot our feature film in 21 days. Like when we did Depth of Field, that was 21 days and like on a stupid micro budget. So-
And you know, again, he was sort of new wave adjacent.
Sure.
I wouldn't put him all the way there, but he did have the machinery of a studio where when it was go time, everybody was crack at their job.
I was also reading that what came out of that too, post-war cinema, was just how sparse. He was an assistant director on a lot of these pictures right after the war. And there was just not a lot of film, like actual celluloid. So it was like precious. It was like gold.
Materials to build sets. Or
Yeah,
anything.
so they had to be super resourceful. And that's where he learned just to shoot for edit. Because he's like, I don't have the film for this, so we're going to treat it that way.
Yeah, and by the time he got to Branded to Kill, the film we're talking about is in black and white, which he had not worked in black and white for several years. It was sort of a punishment because his preceding film, Tokyo Drifter, the studio bosses, having tried to rein him in, were so angry with this film he turned in, Tokyo Drifter, which has lavish color and sort of MGM qualities to it from the musicals of the 50s. Just his use of color. But, you know, he'd been making color films for some years at this point, and as punishment, they basically cut his budget and said, you know, your next film is going to be in black and white.
I'm also
And he
willing to
took the
bet that
challenge.
the choice of that too. I don't think I've ever seen a film like this. Certainly not a genre film, but more like not a noir film necessarily in CinemaScope. This was in CinemaScope. This was widescreen. This was a musical format. You know,
He uses it well.
Yeah.
We should probably, I don't know if you want to now take some time to orient people because we haven't really talked about what the film is about.
Yeah, sure.
in case
Let's
for
do
the
that.
people that don't-
Well,
I'm guessing since you guys have never seen this film, a lot of people listening may not have ever seen
yeah,
this
we
film.
always
with you.
encourage.
I'm with you
We
guys.
did. I think we pre-read it, right? We previewed it at the tail of the last episode. We did. We told people to go watch it, but
No, because we said that we didn't even know.
no. On the last episode, we did. We did preview it. But regardless, like
We made some
if-
log lines.
The good thing about this format is you can pause this, go watch the film, come back, and then you can. But we always encourage people to. But
Do that now.
Give us your introduction on this film, Chuck, and then your rating after that.
Ooh.
Well, I'll go in reverse order.
Okay.
You know, you guys have been very kind on the ratings. I would be less than your ratings
Please
for
do.
the film itself,
Sure.
as far as in the context of cinema itself. But this is one of those favorite directors of mine that you can't watch any of his films without sensing the exuberance of making something. And as filmmakers, I love to turn Seijun Suzuki onto other filmmakers because I think you come away, you're not wanting to emulate what he's done, though people like Tarantino certainly have.
You can see a lot of
You see
Kill
a lot
Bill.
of
Oh my
Tarantino in
gosh.
this. Jim Jarmusch directly cribs from this film in one of his other films. But when you watch films by such unique directors and filmmakers as this, I think you want to go make stuff.
Yeah.
And it gives you the freedom to say, wow, you can get away with that. You can, all the ways that we've been taught how to make narrative films, he breaks.
Yeah.
breaks all the rules.
Yeah, it's essentially a film noir. It certainly has those influences from America, but he deconstructs all of that.
Yeah.
The Yakuza film that he's now on his 40th film, he's also deconstructing that genre. And there's some really great stuff nowadays that you can see on. I think Kino has several bunches of Nikatsu noir films that you can see Seijun and others from Nikatsu making films like this, not quite like this, but with those strange influences from around the world. Again, Japan at this time was really a crossroads of, they were watching American films, old classic films as well as new films. Joe Shishido,
there we go.
Part lead.
who's the lead in this film. He had worked with Seijun Suzuki multiple times, and he had come up. He was one of Nikatsu's what they call diamond guys. There was 4 or 5 of these actors that they built whole, careers around.
Oh yeah.
And he has this kind of Western look to him. He's thin. He's kind of lanky. He's very distinctive in the face.
We talked about how he's got
those weren't cheekbones.
They
he
were
actually had
cotton
implants.
balls, I'm sure.
They were, right?
He
I knew I read something
had
about
to
that.
he hired a
They
doctor.
had to.
You can see it there if the audience is looking, to implant.
For what reason?
He thought he was too thin. He thought it was more masculine. He had injections in his cheeks for years.
Wow.
For years.
In this period.
I wonder if Marlon Brando thought, that's what I want.
Yeah.
It's pretty
probably
much
called him-
commitment. Yeah, it's commitment.
It's commitment.
So
commitment? Okay.
once you see Joe Shishido, you'll always recognize him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It looks like a chipmunk that's eating a bunch of acorns.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Little hamster with
Yeah.
it.
He later would say he regretted it. But even Joe Shishido, I was reading an article, interview with him several months ago, and it's amazing the American film references, and this is maybe when he was in his 70s, and he's looking back to the 60s period, and he's talking to the interviewer about studying people like Burt Lancaster and John Wayne and Henry Silva and Richard Widmark, and he's naming their filmographies, and still decades later. So this was a real student, Joe Shishido. Suzuki, of course, would have been influenced by all of this stuff.
Right.
But the film is essentially a Yakuza film that's been broken in all the ways you can break a film and still basically tell a story. I'm curious if you ever got lost in this.
Honestly, yes.
Towards the
Mainly
end.
in the beginning for me, actually.
I think just like the kind of jarring situations about location and some of the jump cuts were interesting, but
Yeah.
But it was
He
very
famously
fascinating.
would say, later in life, that to him, time and place were nonsense. And in fact, that became the title of one of the few English language books on Seijun Suzuki. So,
wow.
but yeah, the way that he dislocates you within a scene, between scenes, you're just jumping from place to place. In this film, though, it is a linear film, so he's not, unlike some film noirs that play with, in America, that play with time and become nonlinear.
Usually start at the end.
We do start at the beginning and end at the end. But what's fascinating as you go along is you see, I think as filmmakers, how he is reducing the pieces that he's telling the story with to the bare minimum and really stretching whether he can get away with it and still tell a coherent story.
Something that's phenomenal is that he still maintains his vision. Like specifically in the scene where he's in the apartment and number one can still see him everything that he does.
Yeah.
There was something eerie about that framing wise, composition wise, all the shots he was just barely a little piece. It was either the top of his head or the bottom of his shoe, and then even when it came down to like the phone call, you had the patterns, and even that was just something really quick to snatch. And to do something like that on such a fast, paced shooting schedule,
Right.
with so little pre-pro is honestly
And part of that punishment would have been that this film was made even tighter than the 25 days that was normally allotted for shooting. And as you mentioned, it was basically edited and post-produced, meaning the sound too, in about a day.
Yeah.
Which gives the whole thing, because it's missing these connective tissues that we're used to seeing in most cinema, just transitions, simple things like how does somebody get from this apartment to that building?
There's no driving scene
there's no
in
driving
that, or
scenes.
Now, was the plot or the film meant to have a meaning or?
What do you mean?
I think they also spent about a week writing this. So this was one of the rare films that Suzuki actually helped write because
There
it
was
didn't
8
have a script.
screenwriters for this thing.
Yeah,
8.
so it was he and a bunch of young buddies, And so the screenwriter, the name that's credited is the pen name they picked just to reference all of them. One of his friends that helped with this the same year went off and to tell you what was being made in Japan at the time. His film that year was called, I think it was Inflatable Sex Doll of the Wastelands.
All right.
One of the things Nikatsu was also doing, which I think blends into what we see in Branded to Kill, is Nikatsu by this time was making pink films and what they called Roman pornos. They were softcore films. Like a lot of places, cinema centers around the world, by the 60s, you have a relaxation of codes, censorship. The audiences are new and fresh and wanting to push the boundaries. And in Japan, like in America, if you think of the films of someone like Russ Meyer, for instance, they are introducing a lot of nudity. And Nikatsu was going even further than what we see, the nudity that we see in Branded to Kill, and making these straight up, softcore pornography films.
Yeah. Even the actress who plays I forget her name, the first kind of love interest.
The first one,
His wife.
Yeah,
His wife.
she oh man, she wasn't even an actress, so nobody was willing to play that role because she was constantly naked and she was kind of aloof and dumb and so what happened was they got some burlesque dancer and hired her to act in this role, and then she never made another film again.
Yeah.
This was her only performance ever in cinema.
Wow,
and,
that's quite good.
Yeah, it's pretty great. Yeah, I'd say so.
Yeah.
For Suzuki, since we're talking about sex, that first sex scene in this film,
Mariko Ogawa, by the way, was her name. Mariko Ogawa.
where he comes home after just taking this very strange ride in a thunderstorm in a convertible with the top down with another woman. Who is still on his mind when he gets home. And we should mention that Joe Shishido plays what's called the number 3 killer, who wants to be the number 1 killer in the Yakuza. He's working his way up, or hoping to. He's on a quest to better himself and be the top killer in the Yakuza. But he gets home. He has this fetish of the smell of rice. And he's, throughout the film, sniffing boiling rice. He loves it. And it's like an aphrodisiac. It arouses him. It's like Viagra. And it's like he does 6 lines of Coke, when he smokes this, smells this stuff. And his wife, Suzuki takes that whole scene that then leads into this wild set of sex scenes.
Yeah.
None of which are in a bed, which he will cut to and show an empty bed.
Good.
Yeah. Kitchen.
I love that. I love the emptiness of the bed in those moments
So
because
they're
were
having
just
sex all over the
like
apartment.
she says it right, like we're beasts, we're animals, and they're just going at
it's
everywhere.
this animal
but
sex.
the sacred bed, the marital bed, if you will. Like it's such a good choice.
But Suzuki is also intercutting throughout that scene with images and even intercutting sound from the rainstorm.
Yeah.
There's a shower and then there's a rainstorm. He's having sex with his wife, but he's also seeing the woman he just rode.
And then there's rice.
And there's rice. And the rice sniffing.
He's always cooking.
But it's what an interesting technique for if you're low on time and just need to create that kind of transition where it's raining and we have a lot of shots of him being in the car with the other girl and it's raining. We see the rain hitting the window and then all of a sudden the rain is the shower head hitting the other girl, and that's our transition to get to the next spot. And again, what essential?
And at that point, we don't know who that girl is.
Yeah.
Right.
It's just boom.
Yeah.
We're somewhere else. Something else is happening.
But it's also it's again, like you were saying earlier, broken down to its bare essentials. Like, what do we need to get this done? Get the transition over. Get our minds focused from this place and connect us into the next one. Because then something so simple, it's probably overanalyzing, but just with that scene, the rain outside and then the water hitting her from the shower head shows you that his mind's still there. His mind's still focused on everything he just went through and doesn't really know how to process that situation.
But then you can take that moment, that incredible sequence of images and sounds, and you blow it up to the whole film, widen your view, and you begin to wonder the dislocations that are happening. Is this because everything is being filtered through his experience?
Sure.
And the psychology of the protagonist is warping what we see literally in the film of what Suzuki is showing us, because there's lots of scenes in this film, the way they shoot them and the way things just there's another scene where he finds her dead, and the next scene she's in a completely different room, in the toilet actually.
Yeah.
Hanging over
With
the
the
toilet.
hair.
And there's no rhyme or reason to how that happened. But the music that's in here too begins to, just the overall effect, I think, is one of decentering us and dislocating us from reality to where it feels like a dream, the whole film.
Yeah, I wonder if he gets, or he was influenced a lot by Hitchcock, because you do get this like Vertigo kind of character, you know.
That would be interesting to know if he saw Vertigo.
Yeah, because that's how this character felt, just constantly sweats and paranoia and figuring out like what do I do? Do I go to the girl? Do I save the girl? It felt a lot like Vertigo for me, this character.
Yeah, he certainly becomes obsessed with Misako.
Yeah.
Who their very first interaction, I think his first line to her is, "Are you married?" And she says, "I hate men."
Yeah.
And he's at that point becomes transfixed by her.
Yeah.
the unattainable thing.
Right.
Yeah.
And even when he's with his wife, pulls the covers over her face
Oh yeah.
while they're having
She's
sex.
like, yeah.
So Suzuki is not only telling us in images and sounds that part of his brain is still with this other woman, but then he's also showing us in action that he's also, what we were seeing is
He's transfixed on
is part of his psychology. And then of course the last third of the film is all about psychology and him being broken down. So for people who haven't seen the film, the number 1 killer turns his sights on the number 3 killer.
Because he killed the number 2 killer,
Yes.
so now he's kind of number 2.
Yeah, so
Took
he's
him
going to
out.
kill number 3 before number 3 can kill him.
Yeah.
But everyone in this film, all the main characters have a fetish. I mean, there's a rice-sniffing protagonist, the number 3 killer. His wife
The butterfly.
it has this sort of nymphomania, animalistic
Always ready to go.
desire for sex. Misako loves butterflies and killing things
Dead
and sticking them
animals
on the
and-
wall. So when we get to Misako's apartment, it's covered in butterflies with pins through them.
Yeah.
And small birds.
Literally a dead bird hanging from a rear view
No,
mirror.
yeah, and then that whole like line of like when you see the number 3 killer and he's kind of like broken up because like his wife just tried to kill him.
Yeah. Right.
Then he goes over to her apartment and then she's like, "Where should I pin you?" And then that's when he freaks out and grabs the gun. It's like, what the hell?
It's just going to be another object on
Yeah.
the wall. But the number 1 killer, that whole last third of the film, is him basically psychologically torturing the number 3 character, making him so paranoid. He holds off killing him or attempting to kill him to watch him slowly unravel psychologically for days, because he knows at any moment he could be killed. And so he becomes holed up in his
It might even
apartment.
be a testament to like him saying, "I'm such a good killer, I'll make him kill himself." Like I'll just that's how good I am. I'll just let
But
him.
his fetish is watching his target
Yeah.
suffer.
Oh.
You know, and so it's fascinating
That's
that
so cool.
Suzuki is
Yeah.
weaving all of this stuff into the film.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you caught this. You know, I've seen this film over a number of years and a number of times, but it strikes me when I watch it now that there is no one except the characters in this film. This film is made in Tokyo, and the only people you see in the entire film are our protagonist and his targets, or people trying to kill him.
Yeah.
And everybody dies.
Yeah.
And they're on the streets, they're at the wharfs. There is no evidence of the rest of Tokyo in almost every scene of this film. They are always alone.
Kind of like a Departed type of situation.
Or
where-
City
Well,
of God
and
or something.
The number
Yeah,
1
City of
killer
God.
tells him at the end, you know, that for a killer, you know, they live beyond loneliness. And so it takes on this really unusual, that's why I say it's got a dreamlike quality. It's almost, it's certainly existential in that regard,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
everyone is isolated and alone in these large landscapes that he shoots
And I think
them
that's
in.
what I love about it, because this is almost more to me was an exploration of loneliness and an exploration of like what Tarantino loves about his films, and what he tries to do is try to peel back the curtain and what would a hitman do on his day off or whatever, this is what does a hitman do in a love triangle, or what does he do in, you know what I'm saying, at home with his wife and that type of thing. Like you see all the existential questions of course, but also kind of the mundane stuff of him just like sitting around and waiting for the next thing, or it does get more paranoid as the film progresses, but you see nothing but insecurities from this guy, and peels back the curtain that way. And I think that's what I loved. It's like, well, I'm not happy with the nympho because that's all she wants, and like, I guess, and then this other character I'm transfixed by because she thinks about what happens on the B side, what happens in death, and being obsessed with that, and at the same time, like, it's also not like this cliche thing of like, I want out, I'm out of this life or anything like that. It's just like, I'm here to do a job. I do want to be the best in this field, but I'm kind of just like bored and tired of life.
Under that lens of like the exploration of loneliness, like this character, as much as he wants to kill the people who are inconveniencing him, then somebody dead is like another line of connection gone, So like with the girl with the butterflies, who it's like, you're crazy and you're trying to kill me. Like, I should get rid of you. But then he's like, you just take your clothes off. Like, what are you doing? Like,
and he also has like this care for her that he almost sees through that. And he's like, you just need a hug. Like, you just need intimacy. You need human connection. And I need that too. I'm just not willing to admit that. And he just, most of the time, just kind of wraps her and comforts her. And that's this really interesting thing.
But any sense of love is out of reach.
He says to number one, he says, guys like us can't love women, or guys like us can't.
And everybody ends badly in the film.
Yeah.
They're all corrupted. It's interesting, setting it against Tokyo, one of the largest cities in the world, and then having these empty
warehouses and the train
Docks.
tracks and docks. And
they're isolated against this massive architecture sometimes. There's a moment where Suzuki decides that when Hanada, the number 3 killer, is slowly falling apart psychologically, he's surveying the buildings around him, and they're all in reversal. They're all negatives. So he's just.
But they're full of life too,
why
right?
Not?
I mean,
we're just going to push the boundaries here and there, and so I do think boredom is part of it. I think he was an extremely instinctual, maker of art, because with the time frames he had to cook this stuff up and to invent on the fly. The rice sniffing, I know, is a big thing for you. It's a cool
and also
cool
in the film,
right? Don't get into your personal life. Suzuki, one of the ways that he got budgets, they would give him a budget, obviously, but they'd stretch it by going to manufacturers and basically product placement. And they went to a rice cooker company,
and he just wrote it in,
and they got a little extra money. And once they had the notion that we have to show a rice cooker in several scenes, he and his little band of writers are like, well, let's make something out of it.
Wow.
What if the guy has a fetish for the smell of rice, cooking rice?
Imagine that, like, as an actor, that you have to walk around everywhere thinking like, my dude just wants rice the whole time, and then they're just like, hey, we need the money. You got to really love that rice. Like,
that really gets you going.
Get us our money
we're
back.
60 years later, and what director that we know who says you have to show Coca-Cola products then takes the next step and says, well, let's come up with a reason why there's Coca-Cola products.
There might have been, there might have been like how that's evolved. Like, because now companies are so precious about how are you using it and where are you using it and for how long are you
sniffing Coke.
You can't be. Oh, it's so
Watch
great.
me.
It's so great. That's crazy that this was a product placement type of situation. Honestly, that is a bit of a commercial beauty shot when we see the rice cooker in the middle of the table, right? Like,
you know what? And it worked because one moment through the film, Carlos stopped all of us and was like, I need to buy a rice cooker.
I need a rice cooker.
Very genuine.
I need to buy that rice
cooker. Buy that one. Oh, that's so great. I do want to touch a little bit on this. Well, before I do, did you give us a rating? Give us a number? No. Do you want to? Not yet? Okay, fine.
Well, I told you it would be less than yours, but that I would rate the effect of the film on filmmakers, I think, and those in the arts really high, because it is one of those unique individuals and filmmakers that you don't come across very often that are so unique. There's no one copying there's no reason to copy it because it's so distinctive that they just exist in their own little universe and orbit. But the enthusiasm they bring to what they make is infectious.
Yeah.
And I think you come away from films like this and as many of his other films, I'd say Youth of the Beast, which also stars Joe Shishido, is another great Yakuza film from 1964, I think, Gate of Flesh.
This was like you mentioned, right? This was his Toshido Mifune. This was his De Niro. This was his muse in a sense.
So this was the last straw though for him, because when the Nikatsu bosses saw what he turned in,
You think they were mad on his last film?
he was fired.
Yeah, he was
said,
fired.
Wow.
That's it.
He got lucky.
We're done giving you money.
Yeah.
They thought it was incomprehensible. I don't think it's incomprehensible. I actually think Tokyo Drifter, his film before this, might be a little harder to follow.
They went as far as shelving the film for like 10 years, didn't they? They just didn't give it a wide release at all.
Yeah, and you know, all of the directors you've just mentioned and films you've just seen are acknowledged masterpieces and from really important filmmakers in the study of cinema. This is not the case with Seijun Suzuki and films like Branded to Kill. And so it's sometimes hard to go back in time. And you know, we love this film. It's taken on. It has a cult following now.
Sure.
His brand has gone up
Yeah.
in the last decade or two, thanks to like Kino and Criterion and Janus. But I think sometimes we take these films and read too much into them. And you know, I don't know that the guy was a genius. I think he was really talented and working under extreme circumstances. And
Magic.
Is it?
and
But you
know,
don't you don't deem. I mean, there's people that
making art.
not in the case of Suzuki, but definitely in the case of Godard, somebody people deem them as these geniuses almost
Yes.
right off the bat. But that's kind of the interesting about a cult following. I mean, somebody like TCM or Criterion, they're not just giving them a spine for the sake of giving them a spine. Like you do go back to acknowledge.
There is something important here.
Is it
And
like
I think for us, I don't know about you guys,
Yeah.
but for me, I think that why I rate it so high is because despite the fact that, you know, something like Scorsese starting the Film Foundation because most of silent cinema was just lost in history and time and never to be found again or destroyed. When we go back to films like these were run-of-the-mill films, and they're still better than most of the shit that comes out today.
Absolutely.
So that's what's
That's a
most
good
interesting to me. Is just like, why not honor filmmakers like this? Because I think he was taking a stand. I think he committed to this vision, and rightfully so, because nobody wanted to hire him for the next 10 years. He didn't make another film for another 10 years after this.
Yeah.
Because
And it was these
he
students-
had this reputation now.
There were student cinema clubs in Japan at the time who liked him and liked his work, and they actually protested his firing. Tried to do film festivals of his work, and Nikatsu wouldn't release the prints to them.
Wow.
But it was a very small, youth-oriented group that acknowledged in his time there was something here. But for the most of the commercial world, you know, these films were not intended to make a lot of money. They didn't make a lot of money. They were always released usually on the B side of a double feature with a much bigger film on top of it. And I think one of the interesting things to think about in that context as always making B movies in the true sense of a double bill is that I wonder if Suzuki was also understanding that his film would be seen in contrast to the A film. And he needed to differentiate,
That's interesting.
From the two,
create
Set it
a
apart from-
contrast.
Yeah.
As just being a good B movie director. And it's curious that Nikatsu would fire him because so much of Nikatsu's DNA is what created this. You know, this notion that you pull from international sources, you make these films. They were known for making, I think when critics write about or scholars write about Nikatsu in this period, they're talking about films that were made in Japan but are not of Japan. This was for internal consumption only. This never would have gone outside of Japan. But the Japan we see in these Nikatsu films, and particularly the Seijun Suzuki films,
Kind of the underbelly
are
of
contrasting so much with the traditions in Japan up until that point. They are not part of the classical in the way that Godard and the others you talked about were reacting to the classical French filmmaking. He's still working in the studio systems, Suzuki is, but the studio itself is leaning into the youth revolt culture of the time, which is pulling influences from international sources and shoving it all together. The jazz that's in the film is, you know, American influence. The noir aspects of it are American born. The big cars are Chevrolets and So he's really capturing all that, and it is fascinating. I get that their critique was that the films were becoming more and more tenuous in their narrative understandability.
And whether it was like Suzuki or Nakatsu saying like, I just saw Double Indemnity. We're doing that. That's what we're doing next. Like it's very interesting. And again, but they didn't. I haven't seen many other Nakatsu films, but they didn't half-ass it either. This was a very well-made film, even in this context of you have 20 days,
and that's
figure it
the
out.
studio aspect. Yeah. It's not like the other new waves that are happening where they are
picking up
outsiders
a camera.
outside of the industry, first-time filmmakers who are trying to make films outside of a studio system by hand. Mm-hmm. He's not doing that.
Right.
He is not from
and
that
like
tradition.
you said, this is his 40th film.
It's
too,
his 40th film.
Yeah.
He knows what he's doing. They know how to get something done. They're reusing sets from other movies. They're reusing props. They're not sitting around building all this stuff. They're just go, go, go. Let's get the shot and move on. So I think he is unique in so many ways. And one of them is he's one of the few that have 1 foot in the studio system and 1 foot out. And somehow it's remarkable they let him get to 1967. When you think about the rest of the world and what you could make within a studio system in any other country in the world, the fact that he got 4 or 5 good years at Nikatsu to turn out 8, 9, 10 films that are so unique and really push the envelope so much.
I love the idea of that producer from Ed Wood, just having a conversation with Suzuki and being like, all right, kid, you're on your 39th. I don't know if I'll give you another chance, but he does. He keeps getting, an opportunity. But again, it's low pressure. It's not Tokyo's story. It's not this revered thing. It's just this kind of situation where we're,
and again, making it with the intention of it being a B movie.
Right.
Making it with the intention that you're trying to fill in that space. You got 90 minutes. But feeling like there's so much wiggle to play with. And then again, contrast where you would see a lot of like, let's say, traditionalism in filmmaking, and then seeing something like this where it's like, okay, you already had that. You already had all the traditional aspects. You already had the traditional storytelling, the model. Now let's give you something that like jolt back your attention. Something that's going to really separate itself. The scene that I can't get over right now is where that he's running around paranoid and there's a lot of things racing through his head, and instead of showing like the rain or anything, we just see pictures of rain and pictures of butterflies and then a picture of a bird in the front and then it's like
starting to crowd him out of the frame.
I read that the intention behind that was to save money so that they wouldn't have to shoot these inserts that they already had.
That's how Tower's making the next feature.
Yeah,
we're just using pictures of shit.
But the other thing was that they were so worried about they were already showing nudity and all these themes. They were so worried about it being darker than it actually was. So if you would cut to these like almost more depressing inserts, it would somehow even weigh the film down even more. That's what they were saying. That's what I read. That was kind of like the intention behind these drowned things. And he was like, well, he was also
somebody's niece to draw butterflies.
But he was obsessed with pop art too, and that was part of the inspiration. Is like this. He was kind of into that. The last few films was like pop art cinema, right? Like he was just kind of like Andy Warholing it in the sense.
In '63, he got assigned a production designer whose name escapes me at the moment, but they worked together on most of the rest of his films except this one. And that production designer really understood how to bring the art side of it into the film to play on the tendencies that Suzuki already had.
Okay.
And so leading up, I think you'll definitely see it in Tokyo Drifter if you watch that film. It has got some wild production design. So Suzuki is kind of unburdened now because he's also been working with this collaborator at this point, who has also shown him how to, make the environment.
Use art. Was it Takeo Kimura? This was the production designer on Tokyo Drifter.
Yeah, I think that's
Takeo
him.
Kimura.
Yeah. Going back, I think it was in '63 they started working together. Like Gate of Flesh, which is it's about the post-war era. There's rubble everywhere. Tokyo, is destroyed, and
ashes and diamonds type of thing.
And there's a collection of prostitutes in that film,
and
they all wear these extremely vivid colors, each one a different color. And I still remember. It's been years since I've seen it, but I remember there's a place. They live in this hovel, this gray ruin. And he's got shots of them all collected around this rubble, and it looks almost like a tropical fish tank.
Is Flowers of War based
That's
on this?
beautiful.
Flowers of War, Chinese film with Christian Bale in the lead. It's about the same thing.
Gator
It's
flesh.
a priest or someone kind of posing as a priest, as an alcoholic priest, who like just takes in a bunch of prostitutes into a church as a safe haven during the war,
Christian
or right,
Bale?
kind of telling of the war. But they're all in like kimonos and like it's Google Flowers of War, and I'm sure some of the stills. I wonder if that film is based on this one. But anyways, that's just that's so interesting.
So even back then, they were starting to play around with these really wild connections. What colors meant for him. He would have a color,
like this is the
color palette.
Flowers of War.
And then to do these scenes that looked almost like these tropical fish that are floating around in one of those, tanks.
Fish tanks, bowls.
With ruins in the back, those little plastic ruins you can put it literally, that's what reminded me of. I thought it's such a direct quote. I think that he's just having fun here and playing. It's like, how can we take
Cinematically.
this scene and make it like no scene you've ever seen? We're going to approach everything we do differently.
Yeah.
And then push himself to do that
Would you-
within this incredible tight budget.
I think that's
and
why it
time.
also justifies like why our ratings are, as you would say, like higher than you would rate it, because it's so breaking the norm and it's so experimental, but it really does make you want to ask, like, whenever you're constructing a scene as a filmmaker, like, what can you do that is not just, standard, that's not just coverage, that's not just getting it for the sake of getting it. Like, at least with the last couple of films that we've seen, this notion of very essential filmmaking where you're just getting to the bare minimum. Like, if a person shot, it's amazing how much they'll just go and show a quick pop of like a bullet hole in the head, and then that's it. And then let's move on and get to the next thing.
We talked about like when we were covering like the Apu trilogy, or we haven't covered Tokyo Story yet, but when I screened Tokyo Story, it just felt like our initial reactions for like the Apu trilogy, or my initial reaction with like Tokyo Story was like, you walk out and you're like, okay, like, people are really, really raving about these things. That's interesting. All right, that's okay. Nothing stood out right away at the first screening, and then we either screen them again or you start thinking about it. You start living with them, and you're like, oh, that's why, because the bells and whistles were invented through these films. The what we consider standard kind of quote unquote mundane cinema. This was revolutionary at the time, and Saiyajit Ray was just like showing you his world, for instance, and I like the idea of that, because when we're going into films like these, like the new waves, and seeing just the bare minimum kind of filmmaking and them cutting and saying, we're not going to live in the mundane filmmaking anymore. We're going to try some new things. And obviously the advent of what's going on in the art scene also at the time, and the music scene, and in America especially. Like, I always talk about '69 being the year that really revolutionized American cinema. And again, good cinema begets good cinema. So they were all just feeding each other off these foreign influences. But I think that's what impresses me the most is like what we deem as like traditional cinema at the time wasn't. And for a film like this, that's why it impresses me so much, because this was 67 and he was still doing like these unique out of the box things that sure a lot of filmmakers emulate now, but at the time it was, people were probably watching this and being like, what the hell was that? Like, I don't know. It's just fascinating to me that you can, we can go back and be exposed to films like these and be like, oh, wow, that's where that came from. That's where that came from.
And isn't that thrilling to be a cinephile? And that's what we all hope for is, we discover this new plant in the forest.
Yeah.
Nobody, it's like, I didn't know this existed.
That's a great way to put it.
I didn't know this director existed. I didn't know these films existed. They are like nothing I've ever seen. It's hard to even compare them to other things. But they are these special things that are self-evident when you're a cinephile and you have a broader sense of cinema. You come across a director like this, and you don't need to be told something's going on here. You see it and you sense it. And that's such a thrilling thing.
And I think if you would have had a Branded to Kill in 2025, that would have still gotten people like, I just watched this thing on Netflix, and gosh, it was so great. Like
something that it reminded me of, and I was briefly mentioning it earlier, and I don't know if you've seen it, is the Black Bag, that new movie with Kane Blanchet and all that.
Soderbergh.
Yeah, and it very much feels like this in the sense that the only times you see the characters is when they're interacting with each other, and that whole like triangle element, and they all know each other, but as they go off,
similar aesthetic. That
yeah, and
there's almost never anyone else in that
Exactly.
world except them.
like even there's a moment where like in that film they'll go to a lake to have an interaction, but it's just them. It's just them living in the world. So then the tensions and weight, like even though they're talking about how it's this code that can detonate bombs anywhere in the world, that really all that's outside of them. The real conflict is within them, and who can you trust in your own organization?
And that's what I like about somebody like this. I think this had a direct influence on like Wong Kar-wai's Fallen Angels, which I just screened not too long ago. And again, if you know, we know Wong Kar-wai is the In the Mood for Love guy, and just a lot of what he does and takes his time to do takes 5 years to make a picture, or, but
Suzuki would make 20 films
in that time span. But for him to be influenced by somebody like this, somebody that's not so in line with his type of filmmaking, but at the same time, Fallen Angels, which was one of his earlier pictures, this was before In the Mood for Love. Fallen Angels is about that. It's about a love triangle with these criminals, basically, essentially, that are running around trying to escape something that they did. They committed a murder, but there's a love aspect to it too. And I think that's what I would get as a filmmaker, is like what he did with the relationships in this film. And we spend a good chunk of time in either the initial kind of sex scenes and the domesticated kind of factor of it all, and him being married, and in the new love interest. We spend half the picture in a room with these people.
Enough so that when the film ends, you had the biggest reaction.
What a great ending.
All right.
What a great...
You want to give it away?
Yeah, I mean, this just the fact that he's... And by the way, the juxtaposition, too, and the imagery of the ring, and here was Muhammad Ali's voice in the background of when he's saying...
champion.
Yeah, I want to be champion. I want to be champion. And that whole thing was already kind of great. At first glance, you're like... come on, man. Sprinkle that in the beginning a little bit, right? As a filmmaker, you kind of want that. But the fact that they did that was like, okay, cool. Just look how cinematic this gym is, and the seats. What he did with I don't know why I thought about the Don Haskins Center. Like, could we do that in the Don Haskins Center? Just set up a track and get these empty seats and light them in a noir fashion. It was just so great. But we get to all of that. We have this battle literally in a boxing ring. Yeah. These two shooters going at it, and then you think, all right, he won, I won, and he's celebrating. You almost hear the crowd in the background. And then the girl walks in, and he just jolts and shoots the girl, the love, who we thought was dead.
Well, it's her fault.
She's terribly burned.
Oh, gosh, man, it's such a great ending. No, but none of us were expecting that. Talk about a twist. Even twists are so, like, mundane and cookie cutter now, and we have these conversations about the twist. What a twist. Everybody depends on a twist. This was a twist we genuinely were not expecting. And by the way, what Delao would call, like, the Carlos shots. The fact that he has film in the film, and it's like projecting the girl and her being tortured, but also like she's still alive, and that's kind of it's so cool.
And
man.
like banging on the wall.
Yeah.
That scene too. The protagonist is interacting with the film. There's a scene where the woman that he would like to be with, that doesn't like men, is being tortured, and the Yakuza have sent a 16 millimeter film of this
that he's still
interrogation, and he's reacting to the film itself. The flames when she's being burned by flames, and you have Joe Shishido like reacting to the flames that are just projected. They're not actual flames. And he's trying to grab her and talk to her.
But the initial thing, he flips on the switch and she's in the room. Yeah, he thinks she's
the projector has been wired to the switch. Yeah. So the moment he walks in and flips the switch, it starts the projector.
Yeah.
And she's there, and he believes for a split second
that she's in the room.
Actually,
doesn't he like move it? It's just
he starts dragging. It gets wrapped around.
I really like the idea that
shifts the camera.
Yeah, I really like the idea that the Yakuza is hiring a DP to help film their torture.
What's more is I thought, what did the film lab think? They gotta go take this thing to get processed. You know what I mean? Then they gotta pick up a film keg.
Exactly. Go to your local Walgreens to get it developed same day.
Oh man, it's so good. I love that ending. I thought again, in the traditional sense, or like us as snobs, maybe if we'd see that nowadays, we'd be like, well, that's a hat on top of a hat. Like, come on, dude. Like, you kill her, and then no, this just felt so organic, and it caught you out of nowhere. And I thought to myself, he's gonna kill the guy, and he's gonna go find the girl, because
it's all in alignment with everything about the film, and that's what's amazing about his follow through. When you set up, I just did a few years ago a film noir series for some folks, and so fairly frequently look at film noirs. I can't think of another American film noir, which is certainly an inspiration for these kinds of films, that is as fatalistic as this film. Every single person in this film is corrupted, is criminal, are either about to be killed or trying to kill someone before they get killed. And everyone dies.
Well, I mentioned The Departed, which obviously is not a traditional noir, but I mentioned that's kind of what happens, right? Is like all of them die. There's no righteous kind of situation. Nobody's right in this scenario. And
it's no like Western where there's the ranger who's going to go off and kill everybody, but he'll be the last one standing to
nobody walks away from this.
But the central notion of all those noirs, the fatalism that runs through most of them, is that try as you might, you cannot escape your fate.
Oh yeah, I wonder if like neo-noir
person is, he wants to be number one, but no one's going to get out of this.
Even the idea of getting number one, like the whole thing is that if you're number one, somebody else will want your spot. Like it doesn't matter.
It never ends.
It's the old Western thing. The fastest gun is always going to have competition.
Well, I had this similar feeling when watching like No Country for Old Men, right? That was. No one was going to walk away from this. Like that's how they were setting this up in No Country for Old Men. Like nobody was going to. I kind of had that feeling when he tosses the money into the river or into the riverbank. It's kind of like I kept trying to think to myself, how's he going to get it back, or how's he going to go back?
I don't even want to tell you my theory on Tommy Lee Jones.
Oh, okay.
He never made it out of that room.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, yeah, that's so interesting.
It changes everything when you think about.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, but it's that same notion, right? I think neo-noirs are starting to have that, and which is almost blended into like a neo-Western thing, because I talked a lot about too when watching No Country. I thought a lot about Hell or High Water, and that kind of notion of like these two brothers, and one of them kind of gets his way out of it, but he lost his brother, and they don't get out of this the way they wanted to.
I was thinking too. I mean, we're talking about how it relates to American influences that came in the film, but I've seen enough Yakuza films too to say that it really struck me watching it this week again that it is also breaking apart the Yakuza film, because many of the Yakuza films of the period where in the 50s it was all about samurai. In the 60s it shifted to this grittier, noirish Yakuza criminality.
Underground.
But even within most of the Yakuza films I've seen, there is still the organization, which we don't see in this film. They work for somebody. We don't know who.
Powers that be.
And within those organizations, like the gangster films in America, there's usually their own code, their own socials, interaction. There's morals. There's the tough guy that drives a line at this. But here,
almost unwritten rules that you should know.
Everyone here seems to be an independent contractor.
Yeah,
that's very different. I'm wondering if I went back, if you were actually Japanese in 1967 and wandered into the theater and watched this, if you would also remark how unusual that is. The people in this film, because he's stripped away the society they come out of. And it's just these individuals. And then we get back to this notion of loneliness, that it's a film about loneliness, that for all of the choices each of these characters have made, they are isolated and they can't have real relationships and they are paranoid, and it just leads to death.
Well, that's the thing about. I think that's. It's one of two things. It's either the mundane answer of the writers' room, where like, no, it's too much. We don't need it. We don't have the time. Or the more appropriate, I think, interpretation for me is like, gang culture and mob culture is very much we're a family. Yeah. And these characters can't have that. That's really what it is. It's like if it's an exploration of loneliness.
The point is, I think if we knew more about, it's always hard to look at foreign films because you as brilliant as they are, you think you're losing certain layers of this because you are not native.
Lost in
You're not
translation.
hearing it in the language. You didn't grow up in the culture, so there's probably lots of stuff going on that means something that we're not getting.
It's not getting translated.
Right.
So I think what you're saying, this sense of the lack of the family that the Yakuza
For
created
sure.
within the criminal world is devoid here. He's removed it. There's no bosses here.
Yeah.
Even the boss at the beginning that he's supposedly escorting
Right.
turns out to be, the number one killer so, who works for somebody, presumably. But all of there's a secondary plot about diamond smuggling that kind of runs through this whole thing, and he has fun with that. The smuggling behind fake eyes.
Oh, yeah.
The guy with a false eye is smuggling diamonds behind.
We couldn't help but also joke a little bit about the pipe shot. Like he unscrews the pipe and shoots the guy through the sink, and we were like,
What a Looney
One
Tunes
shot.
way
What a
to kill
Looney
somebody.
Tunes way to
One
kill
shot.
Well, you laugh, but Jim Jarmusch loved it so much he put it in Ghost Dog.
oh,
Way
okay.
of
Oh,
Samurai.
really?
So yes, that's great. There's an exact one of
You
that.
see, right now when you brought up Jim Jarmusch, I couldn't help but think I really love Broken Flowers, and I
Yeah,
only
I do too.
saw it recently, and
Yeah.
and I love the idea of something like this inspiring the loneliness and the exploration of loneliness that something like Broken Flowers does. That's what it is. It's this guy walking around and with his exes and feeling like, what did I do wrong? Where did my life go, and that type of thing. And I can only imagine he was very inspired by something like this.
Yeah, but there is a direct scene in Ghost
In
Dog,
Ghost
if
Dog.
you watch where it's in a guy's house, but he goes to the basement and unscrews the pipes and
The plumbing.
waits for him to look in the sink and then
Oh, that's
he
great.
shoots him right up through the pipes.
Oh my
It's felt
god.
like something out of Naked Gun or something, dude. It's
Yeah,
just,
which,
it's,
of course,
it's fun. It's
if you've
fun.
ever
Oh,
looked
look,
at-
there's the Ghost Dog still in case.
I love how
Oh, it's
in
Forrest
the
Whitaker.
still they're trying to show like next to it an actual sink and the curve it would need to
Yeah,
do.
he sees the red dog.
Somebody's trying to.
No, this is great. No, but yeah, again, I think that's the other side of that coin is that foreign cinema has taught us more and more and more that though great, and it does show you the world. That's what most people in this era were feeling when, and then an American, for instance, would see a Japanese film, is like, oh, I've never been to Japan. This is what that looks like. This is what these tendencies are, these traditions. But almost more importantly, the through line we see that we appreciate is like they're just human stories. Like
Yeah.
the connective tissue or whatever we can relate to, what makes it universal is like, oh, I've been in love before. Oh, I've been in this situation before. Or
I felt betrayed before.
I felt betrayed before. Or
I've
I
been
can
into
understand just by watching either American cinema or reading the news, like I can understand the crime aspect to this. Or like
absolutely.
there is universal themes that
For sure.
us Americans can watch something like Branded to Kill and be like, oh, this is about this. It's a very human story about loneliness. But at the same time, I didn't get lost in any of the traditions the way I probably would in other films. For something like Branded to Kill, it was pretty
I feel
straightforward.
like maybe just like some of those like minor cultural impacts, like maybe again the voidness of like family and the voidness of like certain structures and rules that nobody's really like following a like direct line to somebody. It's always like
Yeah.
them acting like I said, independent contractor.
You want to see the natural or the mundane version of this? Go watch Wim Wenders' Perfect Days. Like you're seeing other countries, like you're seeing other traditions, but in a very like day in the life kind of type of thing. But it is also an exploration of loneliness in a very, and again, not by a Japanese director, by the way, which is another kind of lens to view things through. But that was a great film. But you see like the boring, or not the boring, but at least the neutral day in life version of something like this. It's Wim Wenders' film.
Wow.
But
Yeah.
more real. I mean, this film exists in I like to think of it. It exists in cinema space, which
Sure.
is a place that is not this world. It's, Wim Wenders' films are set in a world that feels like our world.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
You know,
for sure.
I know how I felt about this. You know how some films feel dated. This one feels like it was in the future that never happened.
Oh, that's interesting.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know. I just kind of
Some other society that we don't know
Exactly.
exists.
Yeah,
yet or
because-
whatever. Yeah, that's
Like
interesting.
in Godard's Alphaville, this is playing in a theater
Oh,
on,
that's
on that
interesting.
planet.
yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
That's a great
Because
timestamp. That
I just felt it's similar to like what you're saying. I felt very much like like I wanted to connect to it, but I'm like, how real could something like this be? And every time you try to like ground the film, it does something wacky.
kinda
And it just
like-
wants to live
Yeah.
somewhere else because
It's kind of like the film that Zach screened for us, the animated film.
Oh, yeah.
And that character, what he's watching on his TV.
yeah,
You remember like
yeah.
these martial arts films and
Yeah.
stuff like that? That's what this is. Like
Like,
it's inside the character of one of your more grounded
yeah, because
That's why I
you
was
know,
kinda,
films.
Because
just
in
didn't
what
wanna sound
world are
crazy.
like they so obsessed with becoming like the number one spot of a killer when they're
Yeah.
like working for somebody else that they don't even recognize, like you said, anybody else. They only recognize like, are you number 3 or number 1? Like you know,
but,
that's
but I love a filmmaker who can do that. I love a filmmaker who can take like, the underbelly of society and humanize it. I mean,
Exactly.
because we don't. I mean, this seems like a fantasy world, but
Seems like a dream.
It may not necessarily be. I mean, this we don't know. We don't
No,
live in the
like what-
underground of crime, and you know what I'm saying.
and
Like
she,
it's
finding
much more,
that crazy girl that collects butterflies.
Dude, come on. There's people like that. Like that's what
not
I
my
love about
people.
like After Hours or something like that,
Yeah.
right? Like you could just be thrown and thrust into these. Like just people are crazy. Some
Yeah.
people are very unique that way and stuff like that. Though I agree. It's like out there and it's like this feels like a cartoon almost in a sense, but
But I'm
at the
glad
same time the humanistic things is what grounds it.
No,
for me,
I
you
think
know?
I think a step further is that at least appreciating it in this scale, and for us that want to like dive into ways of describing metaphors
Yeah.
in our own filmography. It gives you so much to play with. It gives you so many different techniques and styles that you can easily incorporate to like heighten a message in your own films. But also leaving enough that's abstract and open because it's such these essential shots that it's just giving you like person dead. Now we're here. All that space in between gives the viewer like their own imagination
Yeah.
and playing with and what they're
I
going
love that
through.
space
Yeah.
in between too. I mean, the tracking shots, the dolly shots
Yeah.
were terrific. They were
CK's
so good.
favorite.
And what's more is I love a film. I say this all the time because we encourage filmmakers to like genuinely learn the rules so you know how to break them.
So you know how to break them.
There's so many moments where he breaks the rules, like just so many moments where I like got so happy of seeing the 180 line broken. I love it. It's great. Like when we're in the track and dolly shots and she's being playful behind the pillars, and then all of a sudden we flip to her perspective and we're like behind her and the pillar. All that's so great. And again, it just shows you that don't get obsessed with that. Don't get obsessed with
For as wild as all the imagery is, you can tell it's working because when he's in that apartment and he's looking at the outside, and I think Eric mentioned it earlier, where you only see little slivers of him, it makes just looking out at the city so eerie and so creepy. It's like, how does he see me, but I can't see him?
Yeah.
And you look at how open the world is, and that feeling of like somebody's watching me. And
You know
I don't
what I
even
thought
know
was
it, you know?
interesting about that too is like anytime we would see bystanders, like the fact that he killed a woman because a butterfly came into his scope. The other side of that is like
She may be the only character in the entire film that is outside of
I was
the
about
No.
to say.
There's one more. There's a baby.
Yeah.
There's a baby in the scope the second time, and it scares him.
Yeah.
He looks through the scope, he sees a baby, and he kind of jolts. And to me, that's like this the interpretation of like real life. The real world scares him, like being domesticated even, or like he doesn't know that world. That world scares him. The killers, it's like that's part of his world. He's
Exactly.
expecting, but a baby scares him, and
Like
that's
family?
like super.
like the family life kind of stuff.
It fascinates me
We've
that might
spent
be the thing.
over an hour talking
Yeah.
about all the amazing things that are going on in this film. And, they wrote it in days and shot it in a couple of weeks.
Yes, that's
So why do you say he's
Posted
not a
it.
genius?
you see that's something that's been fascinating me this whole entire time is like, does genius, not genius, but are the best kind of creatives the ones that trust their instinct? Yeah, you learn the rules and then you learn how to break them, but when you're right there on the day, do you just trust your instinct? Okay, we had it
and
set
I'm,
for this.
I'm
just
with
go.
that. I'm with that. But it's important to because we have a lot of aspiring filmmakers that tune into this podcast, and it's important to know that there's no wrong answer.
Yeah.
It's like you should explore both because like I have tattooed on my arm 2 of the films that that traditionally they were just filmmakers going out there. They were part of like this repetitive thing and ended up being like classics. And then you also have like something like this, made in days, shot in days, and released in days. But then again, we just also spoke about Wong Kar-wai, who takes 5 years to make a masterpiece. There's no wrong answer.
But
There's-
Suzuki had put in his 10,000 hours.
right.
Yeah.
That's fair.
That's true. We can't.
That is true.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, that's true.
anything that I don't know if any of you are really good a thing like piano or, I wish I was a musician.
Chuck, look at us.
Okay. That's why we're here. I know you run marathons. That's your thing. But, when you get really, really good at a thing, it frees up your mind. And so he's not sitting there trying to figure out, the normal stuff. He's done enough films. He's got... He's surrounded by professionals, studio professionals that are also working on. I mean, if you were a camera person at Nikatsu, you might work on 50 films a year. I don't know. If they're churning them out one a week.
No, that's true. That's true.
So you have all of this taken care of, and now you can just think about, okay, what's the next weird thing I'm going to do?
Yeah.
How am I going to do this different?
That felt, I'll say firsthand as a filmmaker, I don't know if you agree, but that's how I felt like we did Soho's at this time. It was just like, we have garnered enough crew who we can trust, who we don't have to worry about this or that and the third. Like, we had garnered enough. I wouldn't say maybe necessarily our 10,000 hours quite yet, but we've made enough films. I mean, this was, I think, Soho's at this time was like our 45th short film.
Yeah.
So we had made enough of these to like figure out like, okay, we don't have to obsess over this. We've prepped so much in pre. So when we get to the set, we're really not thinking about if I put the camera in then here. It's just like, we've thought about this stuff. We've kind of gotten ready about this.
Yeah, it's also us not having to figure out like the minor details, like I got to figure out like what light to set up and all that. I mean, then you're just given
you're going into the tool shed that you've learned about each of these tools.
You already know everything, and you see that here. You see the fact that like. They have the studio system behind him. They have the tools to play with. So now he's just free to like say, or let's try this idea.
Not to mention, they're also borrowing from conventions that were already invented. So like Noir, I know how to light for Noir. I know that I want to focus on the eyes or focus on the gun and put the light there. Like there's a lot of that facilitates having to do.
Yeah.
To having
so
to
maybe
think.
the moral for young filmmakers is just, make as much as fast as you can.
Yeah.
Because,
especially nowadays, you need to get out.
Somebody once wrote, everybody has 100 bad novels in them, and you got to get them out as fast as possible.
Rodriguez says that about films. He says you have 10 bad films in you. The sooner you get them out, the better.
No, and that's why we always push people to do like the 48-hour challenges or any of those like quick little things where it's just like just make it and go, because even in those small little pockets, you're going to learn so much.
Oh yeah, I guarantee you, if there was a real history of this film, most of what we see, the environments, the sets, the props, were all just found objects.
Sure. Sure.
It's like...
Well, you said that the sets were reused,
They
right?
almost always, Suzuki almost always just walked around. If you've ever walked around a major studio through the prop and set departments, there's leftover stuff. There's a spiral staircase. Let's grab that. And
I'm like that. That's
the
how I'm
apartment
the
needs
director.
We talked
a spiral
about
staircase.
we talked about Ridley Scott, like
works.
with the Gladiator set, and how he had to. He basically sold it.
The first
to
one or
get
second one?
the set from the first one. He sold it. He sold the Coliseum to a company who was just willing to put it in storage.
Oh, wow.
And he sold it to them for like $200,000 or something. And then they kept it. And when he made part 2, he was like, "Hey, can I get that back?" And sure enough,
Wow.
for a price. Yeah, they were like sold it back to
With
him.
interest.
Yeah, so it's great.
it's
But
like-
you're right. You go into a studio and you go into the backlot and their archive, and I'm sure. But that's like the dream. That's almost non-existent. That's an ancient era to us. Unfortunately, we wish we could go to a backlot and still put this Russell and Bustle. Austin and I have been actively watching the studio, for instance, Apple's new show, and it's so great. But again, it's that hustle and bustle. They kind of point out both. They point out like we want to retain that energy in a studio, but the other side of that coin is like, oh, Netflix just rented 10 stages from us and they're not even ours anymore.
In a way, he had the best of both worlds.
Yeah.
He had the freedom of working in the B world,
a
lot of American directors in the 50s in the B world, they didn't get scrutinized very much. They could kind of push the envelope on some stuff and sneak some ideas into their films because everybody was focused on the A pictures. So he had
freedom.
that a little bit of freedom, but he also had the studio system, which allowed him all of these toys to play with.
Yeah. I think they said that the standard was more or less like 60 million yen for each of these pictures, which I don't know what that
they're-
would translate now to now.
I've read that in today's numbers is like 600,000. So maybe back then,
We could do that.
Oh yeah, we could do that.
yeah, $500,000. And Joe Shishido, you know, I don't know what he was pulling down, but
1/3 of that.
Another
budget,
really
was it?
good. I think the first film that Shishido starred in with Suzuki. He worked with Suzuki on more films than any other actor. And it was one of the first films I ever saw from Suzuki, just because of the title. I think it's available on Kino International, but it's called Detective Bureau 23, Go to Hell, Bastards.
These titles.
I mean, you see a title like
These
that, and he's
sounds
like,
like,
I need that for $9.99.
The Once Upon a Time in Hollywood thing, where like he's making like the 14 Fists of McCluskey or the.
There it is.
Oh gosh.
Detective Bureau 23, Go to Hell, Bastards.
I like how
That's
the movie
great.
itself sounds like it's already its own sequel.
It's
like,
already its own 2 sequels.
Yeah.
Right, 2 and 3.
Two
Go
and
to hell,
three.
that's we're just gonna stick them in here.
It's a
I love
musical.
that so much.
It's a musical.
It's a musical.
He did a few musicals
Did
at
he
Nikatsu
actually? Oh,
and
gosh.
some of these youth revolt films early in the
First one, the
50s.
second one.
But
The sequel?
I think you were
They're not gonna
mentioning
watch the third, just
back on
combine
the
it.
board, one of you was mentioning, you know, that the film is closer to the inspiration. When you're working that fast, I think one of the inspiring things about these kinds of films and these kinds of directors
Yeah.
is not just their inventiveness, but maybe we're drawing energy from the fact that whatever creative spark that lit up that screenplay and the notion of making the whole film, they were done a month later.
Yeah.
And so the energy that
Yeah.
they had from the initial inception of the concept is still burning while they're making the film, as opposed to the filmmakers that
Yeah.
do, 79 rewrites of the script.
Oh, no.
And
Yeah.
it's been 2 years finding locations
Yeah.
and then, building sets that have to be just perfect. That red is not red enough. I need, and
Yeah.
all
Rick
of that
Rubin.
leaks out over time sometimes.
But in that 1 month,
yeah.
It's like,
Rick Rubin has a really interesting theory on that in his new book, where he feels that every single time that you get an idea, it's not your idea at all. When you feel that spark, when you get that fire, it's not yours. It's only your job. It's only your turn to create it. It's something, a message from the universe to tell everybody else.
Yeah.
And
like
if you don't create it within the time that you're feeling that
it'll
feeling,
slowly
that
burn
spike,
down.
Yeah.
it'll burn out,
Oh,
and then
I-
the spark will go on to somebody else.
I
And then that's when it's in the
wholeheartedly
future. Yeah,
agree
yeah.
with that. I mean, and that's
Yeah.
why, like
Same.
us, I'll have other filmmaker friends or other writer friends that we're sitting around, and then, I brought my journal, and they have their chock full of ideas, and I'll pull out my phone. That's where I keep my ideas for films, and I'm just like, yep, this is where I'm at with it. And it's so important to kind of jot that down right when you have it, and I couldn't agree more. It really is
Same.
a
That's
fire in a pan thing, like
it's-
a flash in the pan
It's
thing.
crazy going into these kinds of projects. Like right now, the current state of LA is, well, from what I've kind of realized working out there, is their studios are slowly, like they're getting a lot slower. Recently, there's been a 22% less in work rate, I guess. I don't know if that's the right way to say it. But what is picking up are these vertical series that are like 55, 65
I've been hearing
pages.
about this, yeah.
But you're shooting them in 5 days, 6
Yeah.
days,
Yeah.
literally.
Yeah.
And the entire production, you have 1 to 2 months to get these done. And it's really cool to bring up a film like this, because it sounds like this kind of situation was very much happening back then, which also is the same thing that was happening with Lifetime, Hallmark movies back then.
You know what's crazy is like when filmmakers try to do that. Like I think back to Damien Chazelle's thing, his vertical film. He made a vertical film for, I think, for Verizon or somebody. Like, it was a commercial, technically, but it was a big production. It was a guy jumping off a roof, and it was this big thing.
And then you go into these ones.
Yeah.
The budgets right now, the last one that I did was like 600,000, which in LA money is nothing.
Wow.
It's pennies. And you're pushing 10 to 12 pages a day as an AD. You're just stressed. But one thing that is very, very fascinating is seeing how people, like, how they work with it in pre-production and how they execute it on the day. Everything is just, it's the Wild West in the best possible way. And
That's interesting.
It's super cool. It's super, super cool. So being able to still have that fire in the film, where a lot of people just kind of see it as a paycheck, but if you're still able to carry that passion into it,
yeah.
that is fascinating. That's where Suzuki gets props. Right there.
It's fascinating, but I'm gonna be that guy still holding on to like come on guys, come on, let's stay with the horizontal picture. And
I think if anything, the takeaway is just in the speed and the process of like not getting bottled down. Because even you were bringing up like
Right, that's
with
cool.
digital cameras, you can also do millions of takes, and you could like just, or in the edit bay, you can be like frame. screwing with
Finesse
it
it.
and trying to get that one perfect thing. And sure, there's this idea of like what's going to be the ideal final picture, but people get so fixated on that. Where here, the lesson of just get up and go, you're going to make so much more. You know, it just in experience, in what people can see.
Yeah, if you have
going
one
through
day to
that.
edit your film,
and gun.
then you're
So-
pretty much shooting single takes
Yeah.
and in
Yeah.
order and giving it over. Just
Yeah,
put
and
these
it's a
together.
maximum. It's a
Yeah,
maximum because
yeah.
there is the correct. I'm not going to say correct, but there is the process of like taking your time and really refining in what you're going to do, which we've had.
Yeah.
But then also like knowing if we got to get the shot, we got to get the shot.
No, but I think
get it
you're
out
right.
there.
I think the pendulum swings, the cinematic pendulum swings. Right now, it's over there. Right
Yeah.
now, it's in the vertical space, and how can we?
guess
That's kind of revolutionizing a sense of timing, right?
More than the cinematic pendulum, I guess what I'm talking about is the production, production side, like the work ethic behind the
Yeah.
filmmaking. Because cinematically, I completely agree with you. Verticals, I hate them. They're all cheesy. But when it comes down to the work ethic, you're not spending three pages a day anymore.
Sure.
You're not spending 1, 2 days, 3 days to
Yeah.
shoot one scene. You know,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
a completely different ball game, and it's really cool to see. Like, a lot of people don't kind of necessarily you got to be trained for that. kind of
Let
game,
me
but it's
toss this out
fascinating.
there: is the vertical work ethic and the result because of how it's consumed. TV is notorious for shooting 7 pages a day.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? 9 pages a day sometimes. So even nowadays, like series that's what you're shooting on for a half-hour series or whatever. Yeah. So like, is that where TV is going?
Imagine it is kind of like set for the TikTok scene. So
Right.
imagine the way that they're shooting TV. They're shooting those kinds of 7 pages a day.
Just-
We've worked on series like in studios out there in New York and stuff like that. And the way that they ran those, where they would have the sets built and stuff like that. So you're still filming inside of a soundstage. So that's why you can shoot those 7 days, those 7 pages.
the controlled.
But on this one, they're complete indies. So you're shooting on location.
Wow.
When the last one was like, we have base camp set up over there. But we're going from this scene into that one.
Correct
We're
me
gonna
if
be
I'm
shooting over
wrong.
there, so you gotta shift it,
There's
and
also
it's-
film festivals now that are really celebrating that. Like there's
Yeah.
vertical film festivals. That's kind of the thing now. That's a thing now.
Yeah.
So where's the new wave coming
Yeah, that's the real question.
You know.
Honestly, I was actually talking to a friend who works in he works in New Mexico, and he was even giving me pointers at like, hey, the vertical wave is kind of coming over here. I've also heard it's breaking into Atlanta, into Oklahoma.
I never could see it though.
One thing that's interesting though is it does generate a lot of revenue, so it's kind of becoming
Well,
what
yeah.
Lifetime and
Sure.
Hallmark did for the scene
TV
back then,
TV
where
movies.
yeah, it's not really a project. Well, from when I first started working on those, one of the biggest pieces of advice that I heard was like, it's not really a project that you put on your resume, but
Lifetime.
as a filmmaker,
That's good. That's
You're
interesting.
learning a lot.
as a
You're learning a
filmmaker,
lot.
Yeah.
as a filmmaker,
All
you're
work is
learning
good
a
work.
lot.
No, by
You're
the same
getting
token,
consistent work. Yeah,
by the same
exactly.
token,
All work
maybe
is good
it's
work.
films that aren't making it to theatrical or streaming, but can kind of be tossed into a quick format like this.
Yeah,
that's
then
interesting.
All those hours that you're building, working on those sets, the way that, like myself, I love taking notes on call sheets. That's just my thing. But one of the coolest things about that is you're getting those 10,000 hours. You're getting those every single day that you're on set. If you're just somebody that's on your phone.
No, that's fair.
no,
That's
dude.
fair. You got to learn.
you
I
gotta
like
put
that
it that
attitude.
way.
Exactly. And it's
there's,
fascinating.
I
It's
think that's a
super
good way to bridge this into closing this out. And there's no, and I hope all of our opinions, there's no better way to become a better filmmaker than to watch films.
Yes.
And I think by watching even Suzuki's work, like it's that work ethic. You learn that like, oh, you can make a good film if you really tight down and do something
new
special.
fan.
So
Even the little things that kind of go unseen a little bit, like the consideration that this director has for his creative crew as well, letting his DP hold on to certain shots and letting his editor do his thing, letting the actors like perform in their own way.
you've
There
been
was
working a
of
lot
that I noticed that.
in the art department lately with us, Danny, and in other films. So like, I can only imagine you see a film like this and you're like, that's a choice. That's interesting.
Yeah,
That's great. Or whatever.
Yeah,
the art department,
definitely.
the art direction.
And it was just really cool to see that consideration from like, it's even though yes, it's a director's vision, you can still see that there's like elements of all this other crew members that they can put their little contribution.
I was
in.
reading that he doesn't. I don't know if this was the case for all of his films, but for Brandon to Kill, he would never even really work with the actors. Like he would let them do their thing. He would only.
awesome.
His exact words, I think, were,
gives me
I
anxiety, bro.
only like came
He's an actor, that's some
into.
anxiety, bro.
I only
don't
came
have
into. Yeah. I only came in to give an actor a note when they were really going off the rails. But if they weren't,
Yeah.
Okay.
do your thing. Like,
Yeah, that trust.
Yeah,
that could be
it's
there
so
too.
Trust
and
is. I'm
because
still not there yet, but oh man. that
No,
trust.
but again, this is like a feature version of a 48-hour film. Like
Right.
this is
true.
This is like,
A little boot
hey, we got to knock this out now.
it's
And-
that joke that
time
like
frames
if you see in sitcoms or whatever when they're making fun of porn and they're like, yeah, I got this project on Tuesday, but I could squeeze you in Wednesday afternoon. You know, like that's kind of how these guys were. Like, it's just all right. We got this film on the
You got enough?
27th,
We'll
and then
squeeze
that
it in.
film on the 31st, and it's like, yeah, that's really crazy.
Well, I'm
Props
glad
to
you
this
guys
guy.
got to see this.
Oh, it's great.
No,
Chuck.
big
This is a
fan.
great
It's
pick
great.
to close us out, and we really appreciate this. By the way, just to put out there, go check out on Alamo's website or on the we've said this on the podcast before, but the Film Salon. Go check out the Film Salon. These are, if you want a continuation of Chuck curating films for you, that's what he does in the Film Salon. He just got done with a great Bogey and Bacall series, and it's just always curating great films that you can go watch in the theater with an audience. And these things sell out, by the way. Like, so go get your tickets. But go to thefilmsalon.org and it's .org.
.org.
And check out the next slate of films that are coming out there. And periodically you'll hear Chuck and I talk on KTEP on film.
Nice.
So 88.5. Either he's doing an episode or I'm doing an episode, or
Sweet.
sometimes we'll have the pleasure of doing an episode together and just talking
Sweet.
cinema and stuff like that.
KTP.org.
Yeah, KTP.org. There's an
there.
archive of past episodes
Yes,
too.
sir.
So
Nice,
go
nice.
check that out. Chuck, you're like I said, you're just one of the best cinephiles we know, and we hope you come back to the podcast to
Oh, it's a
curate
pleasure.
another pick.
I'm so
another
glad
pick.
to turn people on to Seijun Suzuki.
Absolutely. We really do appreciate that.
Thanks,
Yeah.
guys.
Thank you guys for tuning to this episode. Next week, we kick off our auteur series. We're literally going to go like 5 months of kind of our favorite auteurs. We've sprinkled that in kind of in the past. We're going to kick it off with Mr. Castro's pick. He's going to be curating 4 or 5 weeks of David Fincher films. So
Come on,
we're
you
kicking
wouldn't
off.
miss that.
We're kicking off with Fight Club.
Fight
We'll start out with
Club,
Fight Club,
7.
Zodiac.
Good
Yeah.
job.
So we'll kick it off there. That's all leading, as the laws mentioned in the past, to this big kind of surprise at the end, which we'll talk about. But just tune in next week. Let us know what you think of this episode. If you guys want us to cover more foreign films that we may not be aware about,
Come
let us know. But
There's
yeah,
like 3 more foreign films in the world, right?
yeah,
and then we're
yeah,
done.
yeah. But I'll end the
how I
episode
would-
with this, which Castro loves this quote, which is Bong Joon-ho's thing of, once you get past the 1-inch border of subtitles, you'll be exposed to so much better
So
cinema.
much. So
It's
much.
it's a beautiful sentiment, and we applaud that. And it cancel your Netflix subscription and open up a Criterion account. I promise you won't regret it.
Yeah, you never said that. Yeah,
second that.
absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you guys for tuning into the WatchTower Film Podcast. We'll see you next time. Good night.
Love you guys.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Chuck. Oh my God.